Okay, now that we've talked about the various methods that we can use to modify the output of Drupal, how do we decide which one we're going to use at a particular time? For example, we could use a pre-processing function to remove a particular element from the page, or we could use CSS to hide it even though it's still part of the HTML on the page. How do we decide what we're going to do? Well, here's a list of questions that you can ask and some thoughts on what might be the most applicable for each yes answer to these questions. So one question you can ask is, does a change simply change the position or the look of an element on the page? If so, then typically CSS will get you what you need. Sometimes, however, you'll need to be able to add additional wrapper HTML to particular elements in order to position them in an exact way, and that might require some work in a pre-processing function. Okay, a second question is this change one that will be good for themers to have access to? If so, then you probably want to make the change on the theming layer. So either through an overridden template file or a overridden theme function inside of the template.php file, which we'll talk about later. A third question you can ask is, does the change contain logic? If so, then it's probably something that will go into a pre-processing function, but there are exceptions to this. One is if the logic is very simple. For example, you'll see in a lot of template files where an if statement is used to determine whether there is content in a particular variable before rendering it. And in these cases, something like that is suitable for inside of the presentation layer or the theme function or template file. Beyond that, a good rule of thumb is to put any logic inside of a pre-processing function. Another question to ask is, will you want to reuse this modification either in another site or throughout the current site or as a contributed module to Drupal? If so, then you might want to explore the modular options for overriding the output, because it's easier to port modules from one site to another than changes to configuration, for example. Another question you can ask is, do you need to apply this change as quickly as possible? Now, this is a good candidate for really knowing what you can use the user interface for in Drupal. So what configuration settings are there that will allow you to modify the output? Once you have a good grasp of what's available, you can ask yourself whether one of those options will get you what you need in terms of the output. So this is looking at the configuration settings for the theme, for example, also the site configuration settings. And then if you don't have anything available to you there, it's time to look at contributed modules that might extend Drupal in a way that will provide those settings, because the user interface often will be a quicker way to get what you need, especially if you're not super comfortable with some of the methods that are used to override output at the modular level.